A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum Extra, 2 hours of analysis of the key events of this week. My name is Kenneth Lukwaga-Anderson, your host. Now, this week has been eventful and dominated by one major story, and that is the fact that we woke up to sad news, a disaster that hit Bulambuli district, where over 40 houses were buried. That these statistics I'm providing are based on a report of yesterday, but we know there is a new update already that has come out. By yesterday evening, 15 bodies had actually been retrieved from the mud, but of today we are actually told we have 20 people who have lost their lives. That is after more bodies were retrieved, and then there was one person who had been rescued, still alive, who died from a hospital. And the debate, of course, is going on about what could have gone wrong. Other details actually show 113 people are still not accounted for. They're still missing, but efforts are underway. And today we saw UPDF has deployed about 200 men to actually go and support the ongoing efforts, search and rescue efforts. But there's a big debate going on about why action was not taken to avert this situation, because the experts actually tell us that there were early warning signs that something was about to happen. But the fact that we are also aware of the disaster-prone areas in this particular country. According to MPs from this region, these people were actually affected, had been issued 2 forms of cards, the red and the yellow card. The red indicating they were in imminent danger, and that they had actually accepted to move. So they were asking and saying, why didn't government take action to move them? Yesterday we saw the Prime Minister addressing an emergency meeting where she actually said leaders from the area had turned the issue political and were not in support of having these people relocated. Already, we are told there's a huge widening crack near Mount Elgon, but there are people around there and they are not moving. So we'll be asking a question: what can we do to be better prepared for disasters like this? How do we actually convince our people to move on from these particular areas that are risky? We will also be looking at the theft of billions from the central bank. The country yet to come to terms with the reports that 62 billion shillings was electronically stolen from Bank of Uganda within 60 seconds. Now, security agencies are investigating the possibility of connivance among Bank of Uganda staff and the Minister of Finance, and the hackers were said to be from Asia. Now, similar challenges have been reported in commercial banks not so long ago, and very many people are concerned about that. So we'll be looking at this. How do we actually address this kind of matter? We should not forget, this week we marked the official launch of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Reports show that 17,000 cases were actually registered last year, which means there are so many people who are suffering. Some are silent, including men who are said to be in trouble. According to at least the discussion we have had, this matter was also discussed in Parliament yesterday. And according to cost-benefit analysis, we are actually losing 78 billion shillings spent annually to attend to victims of violence in that kind of situation. So we are asking ourselves, what do we need to do actually to address gender-based violence that is likely to threaten so many families and communities in our country? I have a panel of 4 people. Let me introduce Mr. Joseph Ocheno, member of the UPC party, Pundit on Governance and Global Matters. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum Extra.
Pleasure to be here. Sad that we are here once again as a result, particularly and discussing matters of extremely unnecessary loss of lives. In some cases, although environmental and unpredictable, quite clearly many of them should have been mitigated. And this is the Republic.
All right. Our other guest is Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Uganda Chapter, Pundit on Governance and Human Rights Issues. Good evening, Perry. It's a pleasure having you this evening.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good evening, listeners, viewers, and my fellow panelists.
I have 2 guests who are making their maiden appearance on this particular platform, Spectrum Extra. Ms. Alana Kembabazi, Programs Manager at the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISA. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
And my condolences to all the lives that were lost in really unnecessary loss of life.
Also joining us in studio, Mr. Joel Kitutu. He's the Manager, Emergency Preparedness and Response at Uganda Red Cross Society. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, Kenneth, and all the listeners, and sincere condolences for the loss.
All right. And we want to begin with you, Joel. Very quickly, if you can give us a picture in terms of the latest situation on the ground where this disaster struck in Bulambuli.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. Just as I was coming to this talk show, we were having a coordination meeting. And just important to note that numbers are very sensitive things to deal with. We sometimes agree in principle, but on statistics and numbers, which keep changing because the situation is evolving. Things keep changing, and so we are careful to say the numbers, but the numbers that you said earlier, those are the official numbers that we had as of the last coordination meeting. But we have figures that we'll relay eventually, maybe later on within this show. Maybe we'll have that opportunity to relay because I've asked the field teams to relay the same. But the situation is bad, I must say. The accessibility is bad. If you have been following the socials, you might have seen the dignitaries on border and the soldiers running behind. So accessibility is bad. 2 bridges were destroyed, and the area is far up, just right next to the reserve. So it is quite an unfortunate situation, and I really want to condole with the people.
All right. And if you look at the people here on this table, you are an expert in this particular issue of disaster preparedness and response. And we want to ask you a question. Do you think this situation could have been avoided?
Yes, my simple answer is yes. And I'm not saying it as I, but I'm saying it as we, as the humanitarian actors. Because there are many things that are predictable. Yeah, it's not that the probabilistic, stochastic, and all these scientific models are wrong entirely. They have, of course, a range, a margin of error, but there are quite a lot of things that are predictable, and also the high-risk areas are well known. There is the National Risk and Vulnerability Atlas of Uganda. It's a very big book. I was showing colleagues, and this big book, we call it, on a lighter note, a Bible. It tells you where in each and every part of this country, which areas are at high risk. We have district profiles, sub-county, even up to village level information. There is a lot of information, but the uptake, firstly the dissemination, the uptake, and also the utilization of this information, I think that's where the gap is. Because I decided to carry this information to probe, because I am a scientist. I want to speak with evidence.
And I wanted to ask you, whose book is that? So, is it a book from Red Cross?
So that is a very good question. It points to a very critical aspect. That's coordination. And I would speak that 5 years ago we used to operate in silos as humanitarian actors. Today we are a little more coordinated. We have the disaster risk reduction platform. It meets every last Thursday of the month, every single month. Every single month a bulletin is produced. It's called the Early Warning News, U-News. It is here, this bulletin here. Every single month we compile the statistics for the different hydromet disasters in the country. We are talking about predictable things, and we give out this information. But again, the question is, how does this information trickle down to the local person in Kasese, in Bulambuli, to be able to take meaningful action? Now the action is cascaded at the national level, at the district level, at the sub-county level. Now when you go to the community level, how do you unpack this information in a manner that is palatable to the user, to the farmer, to that person who is at the high-risk area? That is still a challenge, and that's the gap that we need to address even more.
All right. When you look at that latest bulletin that you are holding there, does it speak to such an area, Bulambuli, and probably the impending disaster? What exactly does it say, looking at the situation we have found ourselves in?
So this particular information, and we do call it early warning information, it speaks not only about the risk, but for us we go a step further to say, so what? And that has been the gap, because Uganda National Meteorological Authority, UNMA, has been in existence for time immemorial, in quotes. forecasts have always been given out.
Yeah.
Advisories. Now, 5 years ago, we had a discussion on, apart from saying what the weather will do, what the weather is, what will the weather do? And beyond what it will do, so what actions need to be taken beforehand. And in areas where we have put quite a lot of effort in information dissemination, there has been a change. Kasese is one of the very high risk areas. River Nyamwamba, River Mobuku,
Always busting.
Mugasani, every mom and son time, that is March, April, May, and so on, September to December. Things happen. This is just, even you should just know, every single rainy season, something will happen there. But the question is the timeliness of the early action. How do you set action within that window of opportunity before the disaster strikes to do meaningful action? For example, reinforcing some of these areas so that the water doesn't trickle to households, evacuation. There are things that you cannot do. River, if you have been to Kasese and you have seen the width of River Nyamwamba, surely it's not a small river like a stream. So there are things that sometimes necessitate that, okay, evacuate to a safer ground during this particular time where you are expecting a disaster.
The moment the signs start showing.
Yes, do people evacuate? Now, there are learning points. In Kasese, that is one of our pitching points. We have seen a mindset change. When you engage in the community, you are telling the community you are living with a risk. You are showing them the maps. You are pointing out to different historical record. You say someone was here, he was swept. And you have the evidence, and you have even the names. Last year, so can you move? There has been a mindset change, and it takes time. This is not a one-day process. You are dealing with people, you are not dealing with objects, so you need to respect the people. Uganda Red Cross Society is not like a force that will force people out of their place. So we keep dialoguing with people, community engagement, risk communication, with evidence because people believe what they see. You can tell them nice stories, but do they see? Do you work with them? Are they part of this effort so that they are able to appreciate the risk that they live with and they can be able to mitigate? So this is an ongoing discussion with the communities, and always, as I end on this point, the question is, who is responsible? And that's the question that is always asked. I want to answer it in a very interesting manner. We are responsible, because when we talk about the community, we are talking about individuals. We make up the community. In the morning, I was saying, if someone is driving and he takes water or juice and he throws the bottle out, I'm carrying a bottle in my bag. I carry trash in my bag, and people laugh at me. They say, hey, you guy, are you serious? But I carry it because I'm responsible. It begins with you as an individual. So then it goes to the community, then it goes to the structures up to the higher level. So I want us to have a paradigm shift in the way we are looking at disasters, climate change, and these things that really affect us, because they affect all of us, to appreciate that it starts at individual level. Thank you.
All right. You've given us a rough picture about what is on the ground, but what I've clearly gotten from you that the people who matter actually had information that something like this was likely to happen. Alana, what is your reaction?
Yeah, I was struck. The Vulnerability Atlas is 2018. I was looking at some of the 2020 Annual State of Disaster Report, which also gave some indications and warnings that should have been sounded. We know that every time there's a disaster, it's lives lost, it's transport interrupted, it's health, it's education, it's this huge impact on the economy. And so I think that there's a lot more that could be done. Districts are supposed to have their contingency plans, and local governments are supposed to be very involved, and he can speak a bit to what they do. And for those viewers who are not seeing, he's showing us the district contingency plan of Kabera Maido 2022 to 2024. Right, and also the June 2014 one, and I think he's emphasizing that in 10 years these things have been predicted, but we're not seeing enough action. I think it's time we began to hold the state responsible, because now climate change is here. What we are seeing here is peanuts compared to what happens if it decides to continue on a mass. If there is this happening, and then you have what happened in Kenya, viewers, I was in Kenya when all that flooding was happening, and we're meeting Ministry of Education officials and health, and they couldn't tell us when anything would start. They were just like, we are just waiting. So we know that we have had places that are very prone to disasters. We know that climate change has really exaggerated that a whole lot more. And we are planning. We have been giving some money for climate change, but 500 billion or so was in this last year. But I don't think there is enough coordination and prioritization and engagement with local governments for them to feel they have a stronger voice and stake when these issues are happening. Because some of the things you hear about, like people are given cards and then it took a while to convince them to
5
move.
years later.
Yeah, and it may be that what are the alternatives to them? Many of them are thinking, am I going to completely not have any land? Where will I bury my dead? You have to address those socio-economic factors of the community. They say they settle there because there's a rebel land. So unless there's an intentional effort to address the socio-economic factors of these communities that have to be resettled, and generally to address socio-economic rights, I am always championing socio-economic rights because I just don't understand how we expect to develop or really do anything without paying great attention to those. So I think without really addressing these things, we shall continue to have these disasters happen, loss of lives, and hits to our economy. And so for Ministry of Finance, whenever they come asking on the resource envelope, be swift to act because they are real hits to the economy. And I think that we are yet to fully appreciate them and quantify them. It may feel like the disaster is very far from us. It's these people, maybe it's the landslides here. We heard about what's happening in Pakwach. Anyway, it could be these things that seem very far away from you. But how about you here in the city? There is a disaster knocking that no one even wants to talk about. So I think at some point, between like the flooding that's happening, the reclaiming of the wetlands, plus all these things that are happening, you guys, the rain we have had now is not as heavy as it could be. But if it decides to do so, it will just be a country that will look like a disaster site if we don't wake up. And I really want to underscore that we must link, these are not one-offs, these interventions must be part of the country's strategy, really, when thinking about mitigating and adapting on climate change. And it must walk a very tough and strict line. Yeah.
When you look at the policy documents, you also have an opportunity to reflect on the budget. Do you see the issues of climate change and disaster preparedness and management actually featuring highly on the agenda of our policymakers and decision makers?
I think climate change, they've been running to say they're doing something. COP29 was happening, and so they have to go back and report on what they're doing. But they're not engaging communities and affected groups. Because they're the ones who will tell you the heavy rains here are causing this. Because there's the rains killing people, then there's the interruption of food harvest that you're going to feel a bit later. Then there's all these other long-term effects. And so the communities are better placed to be able to tell you. But when you sit in boardrooms and determine and say we are giving money here and there, yes, we are giving 500 billion and so forth, are you really engaging the local governments enough? Are you engaging communities enough? Are you thinking through those strategies? Are you thinking about the social protection as well that should be built into some of these interventions? Because it's urgently needed. All
right. Spectrum X on Radio 1 FM 90. We're going to go for a break now. When we return, we'll get reactions from Perry and then Joseph, but we'll also be going back to Joel to get a situation analysis, exactly the area in Bugisu, because this is not the first time we are having that kind of disaster. We had the Bududa incident, which was very, very huge, and we are hearing of other imminent challenges in that particular area. What is the situation like looking at the report, the latest assessment report that was made? But we also want to hear from him as an expert. What is really missing? We have all these policy documents. We seem to be prepared in terms of the content, but we are not visible on the ground. How do we move away from that situation to become a disaster-resilient country? Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90. Spectrum Xtra continues after this break. Areas has reached Bulambuli already, and we will be reflecting deeper on these issues. My guest this evening, Mr. Joel Kitutu, Manager Emergency Preparedness and Response at Uganda Red Cross Society, Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network, Mr. Joseph Ocheno, Pandit on Governance and Regional Global Matters, and is also a UPC member, and Ms. Alana Kemba was a Program Manager, Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISA. Now, let's hear from you, Perry. Your initial reaction to this situation based on the information that Joel has shared so far.
Thank you, Kenneth. First of all, it's always sad to lose life, especially life which could have been saved. For me, what struck me when Joel was speaking is that most Ugandans actually don't know that some of these districts have district contingency plans. And those plans are actually quite elaborate. I have one of Kisoro, which Joel has just shared, to Kisoro District Local Government, which tells you which areas are going to be affected by which hazard. You know, it's quite detailed, and I don't think most Ugandans have this information. So for me, I think to be able to prevent a disaster, education is very important. Really, people to be aware that this is the problem, and there is the prediction that this kind of disaster may happen is very important in terms of preparedness. So I think as we move forward, one is to create more awareness about those areas which are prone to disaster, but also for the population there to get the help that they need. Because at times, you know, it's easy to say, oh, why didn't they leave? But where are they going? And I think Alana makes a very important point in that at times the economic factor also determines whether people listen. And this is where all actors become important, right from the national, the central government to the local governments. You know, how much resources are we putting to support these district contingency plans? And I think as Joel comes back, it will be interesting for him to share some of the best practices that they have used in Kasese to get people around River Nyamwamba to leave the area. Exactly. What have they done? But for me, I think these contingency plans are important. They need to be publicized. There's need for investment in, educating the population, but supporting those areas with the funds that they need to be able to make certain decisions. Because the rains are increasing. So you do not want these disasters to continue recurring. Because whenever we lose life, it's really sad. And especially life that could have been saved. So education, financing, ensuring that we use these plans and that there's funding for us to continue to have these plans adapt to what is changing. And this is where I think the scientists become very important, working hand in hand with the central government, the local governments, but also the citizens. So you need money. You cannot just tell people relocate. Where are they going? What is the plan for housing? The economic activity. Children have to leave school. All those things need to be taken into consideration. And this is where conversations on climate change are critical. The SDG 13, which talks about climate change, is very clear on the targets that governments need to meet. Ensuring that they put in funding, they mobilize the population, but they educate. Because when you educate someone, at least they are aware. So they will make decisions from an informed point of view than just telling them you have to go. So I think the contingence plan is important, but we need to be able to fund them, and there's need for more awareness. But as I end, let's learn what are some of the best practices from Kasese, particularly the population around River Nyamwamba.
All right, Joseph, your take.
It's very sad that for me, I have relative advantage of age on this platform, on this panel. I also have relative advantage, and it's a burden of responsibility being UPC and knowing the context of our country since independence. And I know sometimes some of the other listeners get a little bit tickled, but I'm afraid it's a practical reality. This is a matter of criminal negligence by the state. It's criminal negligence. Joel has kindly played it down. Of course, he represents a global civil society organization, the Red Cross. The Red Cross, the last time it got engaged with UPC substantially was in Luwero during the NRA war in Luwero. But clearly, Joel has just told us that this is something which is known. And the information which is there is actually more, like Perry said, I didn't actually know we did have this much. But it is not the responsibility of the average citizen from Bududa. It's the responsibility of government. What are governments for? Governments are parents in households. You know, when water is coming around the compound, then you see, silly little child, don't go and swim. You know, of course they're going to swim around it because it's fun. You know, I remember when we did Bududa, I don't know what dressing Nabanja is having in the east. Museveni went there in a military combat and a gun and actually told people that they're being very silly. Look, away from climate change, when after 1979 Liberation War, when we got rid of Idi Amin Peri, a sensible government did what they do. You know, we recognize that 9 years the country had been broken up by Idi Amin. 9 years the country had been broken down economically and socially and in every facet. You know what government did? Contingency planning. We created Ministry for Supplies and people made fun of it. Ministry for Supplies. We went into the forex, foreign exchange business economically at the time when the global economy hadn't been as liberalized, and we had window 1 and window 2, government planning and thinking. And most importantly, in this case particularly for Mugisu, Mugisu was appointed Minister for Rehabilitation. Now, under this regime, we have a Minister for Disaster Preparedness. Joel has told us that specialist groupings meet every month. He is giving us the burden of responsibility from his end. When these guys meet, what do? You know? So it's not the responsibility of the ordinary villagers. It's the responsibility from central government. Where is the central command? And I'm asking from Radio 1, Mr. Museveni and your team, what have you been doing 12 months leading to this disaster? They need to answer for it. So the people who've died, basically there's blood in their hands. You know, only the other week, Nagongora Bridge broke in Tororo. Part of some of these broader things. But you know, only last week, last month, people who were demonstrating against this infrastructure mess were arrested, were detained. And politicians, in Tororo and Bukedi ought to be ashamed, together with the NL regime, who failed to do that. So right now, in Nagongera, I am planning to travel to the east. I cannot go to Nagongera via Tororo. I cannot go to Nagongera via any other way. We are just planning and hoping that we'll go via Bosolwe. So this is an infrastructure challenge, which is a national crisis, but we also it coming. In Bakwash, I only survived by a day. And then I would have been closed off. You know? These things are happening across the country. But you know what? The big scandals are Mabati, thieves. The big scandals are monies getting lost in banks that we know basically organized crimes within the national statutory mafia. The big crimes are giving 500 billion to Rocco. 500 billion shillings. What would 500 billion shillings do to provide for the contingencies planning and the essentials that are required by both local government and indeed agencies like the Red Cross? So, finally, on this, lest you forget, Japan and earthquake-prone other countries, part of the training that Perry is talking about, you embed this as part of educational schoolings, and so everyone else knows about warnings and things like that. So government does it as part of our daily livelihood, just like people who live next to parks. There'll be lions, there'll be snakes. So it's part then of your natural culture. Fine. But this more recent one, we started with the Golf Course Hotel. A golf course in Kampala. A hotel is built on the riverbank. What do? You're blocking this common sense thing. What do? What is NEMA doing? They're giving away land here in Kampala, and this part of what Alana was trying to say, and maybe she was being modest about it. We don't know the disaster that will hit Kampala. Today, I had to leave 2 hours early to reach this station, because you know what? Kampala is at a standstill. One, partly the common sense infrastructure, this bunch killed a rail network, a transport network here in Kampala alone. But on the other, allegedly, children are ending school. So meaning that alone is a disaster. So the next other time, what I warned leading to this to the Kampala mayor elections, I suggested 15 years ago that one time we shall wake up and Kampala will just be literally to a standstill. People will not be going anywhere.
All right.
Why? Because of insufficient planning and capacity. But a quick one. There is a terrible irony here globally. Global warming is a reality. Climate change is a reality. It does not need average classroom knowledge to be able to do this. This bunch, again, on my return from exile 20 years ago, I need to say this. I was shocked when I reached Tororo. I could see from one village to the other. Forests and trees had been cut off. nothing was done. As recent as 20 years ago, I knew it was an issue. It did not need some expert knowledge from a geologist or from somebody who studied geography or whatever. It was national government planning. So what are we doing? So I think we're being walked after 40 years, we're being walked by into a disaster which might basically sink our country under Lake Victoria by a regime. So the people who need to wake up are all the people of Uganda, but the people who take lead responsibility are this regime.
Right. Joel, coming back to you, you've had an interest from the colleagues on the panel. One, they want to learn what you did in Kasese, if it can be applicable in Bugisu region, so that we can have people who are still, hesitant to move from those hilly risk areas. At one point, I heard about a crack. You might have heard me talking about a crack that is around Mount Elgon that we are told keeps on widening. If it happens and an avalanche occurs, we are likely to lose so many people. What did you do in Kasese that can't be done in Bugisu?
Thank you again, colleagues. And mine is, firstly, I would like to clarify one or two things. As my senior colleague has mentioned, Red Cross works auxiliary to the government.
Important. Yes.
Yes, that's very important. Red Cross is not just any other NGO around, and so we work with partners, humanitarian actors, but we also work auxiliary to the government of Uganda, and we are defined by an Act of Parliament, 1964. I want you to appreciate we got independence in 1962. We are a community-based organization. That's very important.
The oldest, if I may say.
And you realize here, people keep asking us, where is your magic? We have been accused that, hey, you guys with your red T-shirts or red jackets, you are everywhere and everywhere.
It's because you are the ones who are on the ground wherever we have this kind of situations.
Yeah, yes.
And globally,
globally,
Red Cross does extraordinary work, and that's the credit for the record, yes.
All right.
Exactly, because that is very important. Community, because community is where things happen. It's not happening here, it's happening in the community. Even if it's urban community, we are talking about community down there. When we leave this talk show, we'll go to the community, we'll go to our houses. That's where real action happens. So my point here is that, one, Red Cross appreciates the gaps here and there, and that's why we work auxiliary. It is important for us to put a distinction between principle and practice. We can all talk and talk well in principle, but in practice, and this is what we demonstrated as Red Cross. We are first responders. We are a partner of choice. We are in the community. We are a community-based organization. We cannot run away from the community. An organization can come open, talk nicely, run away. For us, we are held responsible in the community. Actually, our composition is the community. We have volunteers, we have membership, a footprint in the community. So when we are talking about Red Cross, we are talking about the community itself. So that is one of the things that I would like to clarify. And that gives us the leverage. Because if you are an organization that is only hiring people, however many people you hire and you send them to the field, you will surely always have gaps, because questions around sustainability will come. How do you sustain this heavy workforce? Where do you even get the money to pay them? You will go to the community, ask the Red Cross members and volunteers who pays you. So the point here is sustainability, sustained action, timely response. And for us, within 6 hours, we have a rapid assessment report. We know what is happening. That's why the data that we relay, we are talking about data from the ground. We are not talking about data from the headquarters here from Joel. One thing that I would like to show you, I know listeners are not seeing this. This is Kasese, River Nyamwamba. We have sensors planted there, real-time sensor. Every single minute I'm getting real-time information. I'm seeing what is happening. I'm not seeing some scientific jargon. I'm seeing even photo and video of what is happening. I can inform people down there and the different structures that, hey guys, the stones are rolling. Please, we have this scientific system, response. And these ones we can validate and triangulate. And this is a mechanism which is not just Red Cross mechanism. This is working in partnership with the DWRM, the Ministry of Water. It is something that developed over the year, UNMA, And all of us have access to these platforms. We see what is happening. And again, just to emphasize, for us not to run away from this point, the question is not the information being there. Information is there. My senior colleague has mentioned about, his senior colleague.
So what is the
1933 to now, we have very meticulous data. Disaster data, you can even just map in a group and trends.
Yes.
So the question is the action, so what? That is the question to answer, so what? And what are our learnings from Kasese? I said 5 years ago, Joel here that you see would go and fly drones in Kasese. Today we have what is called the DECOC, District Emergency Coordination and Operations Center. We have a strengthened DDMC. This is District Disaster Management Committee. I don't go there to do assessment. They do it. Kayunga here, we have just phased out from Kayunga, just near here, there was a hailstorm. We did not go to do assessment. I did not go to do assessment there. So the question is, what are those learnings? From Kasese, we have tried to strengthen the mechanism. And here I'm not talking about the big mechanism, I'm talking about the local. I'm talking about community. That is where our niche is. The communities, the structures, the sub-county DDMC. Here I have this material. You will see the even phone numbers. Do you see? You have names and phone numbers. This is verifiable information. You can actually go and validate yourself. Sub-county, village people, we engage them. What is the smallest unit? Village. So when a villager is engaged in development of this plan, he knows the risks. So that is what has given us some bit of, a success story in Kasese. We have also community radios. They are not planted in government offices. They are planted in the homes of community-based disaster risk reduction groups. These are people who speak their own language. Even in the Mount Elgon region, we are intensifying those groups, densifying them, so that they can be able to take ownership. And in Kasese, it has worked. It can work in Bugisu.
All right. Alana, you wanted to come in, but even as you come in, we have some sort of a dilemma. You actually raised this issue, livelihood, but also the fact that people are attached to places where they have been born from and grown. But you see, we have imminent danger. Should the government be using its coercive force? The state has a coercive force, has resources to probably move these people elsewhere, whether they agree or not, because they need to be saved from danger.
First of all, I'm still overwhelmed, I think, by the severe human impact. It's not just it's the loss of lives, which is very important, but you can say the numbers maybe there's still 113 people missing, right? We don't know what's happening. But there is a complete interruption of everything. Education, economic activity, the food insecurity that is going to be hitting us from certain areas. And I think that we must begin to say it's enough. At what point do we say this does not continue to happen in Uganda? And that requires a whole of government approach. Because when I'm talking the spread of infectious diseases that could come in, Ministry of Health should be all over this. Education all over this. Part of their reluctance is the state of the public services as well. So how you move me, then my kids, then how will we survive? If we could if people could be assured in this country that there is always free education, at least for primary and secondary, wherever your people learn, your kids will be fine. You'll be able to access health care. There's certain things that they will then say, because that's where most people that's what they're working for. They're working to be able to find ways to make sure their families can get those services. I think that's one way to do it, and social protection. Yes, you can coerce people and you can sound the alarms, but it must be a carrot stick approach. It must be able to say that, listen, we've prepared for you a place. I mean, a government as vast as ours should be able to plan and prepare a place and actually make sure that these are rights. When you interrupt my, education or food or shelter, these are rights. And it's incumbent on the government, to which we pay taxes, to be able to do this planning and to have a whole of government approach. I get very upset hearing about how you can sense and track things in real time. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, So if you can track in real time with all this technology, you people, what is stopping you from swiftly planning and implementing and going there before? So we see the high-level officials get there before, not after. Right? And actually, get there before and say, people, We are seeing the data. Please, I am begging you, move. And we are there. I'm not trying to take your land. I'm not trying to take, because these areas are very rich. I've been reading them. Some have minerals. Some have, have been this, and the multi-hazard contingency plans actually talk about that, the impact that happens on tourism whenever this happens. So at the district level, they're already doing this planning. We need to see the whole of government approach really, really coordinated to make sure that they're addressing the socio-economic challenges and also sounding the alarm, because you need to be able to do both.
Perry, should we move these people, all people who are in disaster areas, and probably relocate them to safer grounds? Can we do it?
In 2010, it was done, and I think the people of Bududa, some were moved to Kiriandongo. So it would be
But some actually moved back to Bududa.
Exactly.
Because they have no social protection.
Yeah, it would be interesting to learn why did others leave after they are resettled, and what needs to be done so that if people are resettled, they, establish a foothold in that area without going back to the area which is disaster prone. In countries that are, of course, a little bit more developed, they will ensure that the people who are being resettled do not lack. Now, that's the question that I think government has to continue to answer. How do you ensure that those who are moving don't lack? Their socio-economic protection must be taken care of, so that if they are the schools must be working, the health facilities must be working, and for me it goes back to bigger things like structural problems that the country has, because you move them to an area which may also be having so many issues, so they also become almost a burden to that area. So how do we address those bigger issues so that when we are thinking about disaster, we are not again imposing a community in an area that is lacking? I think for me that would be the thing that I would like to say. But it's also interesting to find out what is the budget that is allocated to this problem in terms of, are there supplementary budgets that are available when problems like this occur. But this can only happen if there is forecasting. What is so surprising is all the information is there. The question is, what does government then do with that information? What does Parliament do when they're appropriating resources so that we prevent this? Because it will happen. So why not prevent it instead of now going into, dealing with the crisis as if you didn't know it would happen? I think that is critical.
Joseph, what kind of action would you want to see going forward?
The police should swiftly move into action.
The police?
Yes, just like we did over Chitezi, and interview people, and I'm sorry to take a stretch, interview people, including Red Cross, on the basis of the available information, and we make sure that people are held to account, structurally at districts, and then national, including at the top. And I'm very serious about this, because unless we do that, because we're just having a conversation, for me, I'm quite fine to come here every other Friday when there's opportunity to have this conversation and to do business as usual. It has to happen. We have the information. We know these are disasters which are pending. We have the capacity. We have everything else. We have allegedly a government. What are they doing? We have ministers for planning. We have ministers for finance. We have ministers for disasters. We have a prime minister under whose docket this is. And we have a president who's actually the chief executive of the state. I was taking nuances about hotels being built on water valleys. I was telling you the fact that these guys killed our railways. And when I talk about that, people think about politics. No. Once, as part of climate change, once you killed railways and road networks, you bring in cars and bring in fumes, you double up the environmental impact and swiftly up the climate change things. Once I wrote in my Sunday column in the Monitor about a new genocide in the north, and I was talking about charcoal cutting in northern Uganda. This is a commonsensical thing that a post-conflict state would recognize, that after the end of the war in northern Uganda, that we need to provide some of the things that Peter and I think Alana were talking about, to make sure that we provide economic alternatives, including causing mitigations. Of course, if at the end of the day people come from an NRA-created bush and concentration camps and they have nothing else, they'll cut down the trees, the only ones they had. But in any case, NRA top guys went ahead and cut down all the mvule trees, that existed at the time. So deforestation that continued to take place, of course it will build into these things. And then, what is it? the outcome is obvious. What should be done? I have just told you what should be done. I think, unfortunately, it's not going to happen easily because some Ugandans, when they listen to this program, they think it's a Friday trip by the four of us to regional studios, when this is real-life realities of the situations. And like Alana warned, worse is coming. Quick one. Climate change, ironically, we have the most powerful man on earth today in Donald Trump. Ugandans, and many Ugandans amazingly are clamping for him. But the guy is actually climate change denier. These contradictions, including the fact that the U.S. makes a huge amount of contributions, including some of the monies that may go to agencies like Red Cross, means our people need to and ought to wake up. So Uganda as a nation state, we need to think really, really for ourselves. Red Cross has already warned us. They've got all the skills and things like that. But they're not a government agency. In any case, anyway, they're not part of us.
All right. We need to go for a break now. When we return, we'll go to Joel to find out some of the recommendations they can make as far as the situation is in eastern Uganda amidst all the concerns that we still have. Should we move the people? What does it require? And is it sustainable? Can we actually have land use change in those particular areas, move them to other places, and have that land doing something else which is beneficial to them? Grow crops, but as you stay somewhere else. There are certain steps that have been taken in other countries to that particular extent. Now stay tuned. Radio 1 FM 90 Spectrum Extra continues after this break. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. At the moment, we are focusing on the disaster that occurred in Bulambuli, where we have so far 20 people confirmed dead, but the records show that over 100 are still missing. But the Prime Minister has reached that particular area. Last night, he said he will man and command the relocation of people who are still hesitant to leave those places. Is this something that is likely to work out? My guest this evening is Alana Kembabazi, Programs Manager, Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISA. Mr. Joseph Ocheno, UPC member, Pandit on Governance and Global Matters. Ms. Perry Aritua, Executive Director, Women Democracy Network. Mr. Joel Kitutu, Manager, Emergency Preparedness and Response, Uganda Red Cross Society. Now, Joel, from the explanation you've given and what I've heard from the people here on the table, it seems that we are not learning from the challenges that we keep on facing. Except for Kasese, where positive action has been taken and the communities are, willing to listen. But in a situation of Bugisu sub-region, we have had Bududa, we now have Lambuli, and there are other places, including Suronko, where we had there are some small landslides that occurred. What would you advise? What needs to be done to save people from this kind of calamity?
Thank you very much. I'm sometimes lost. The words fail me. When you have a lot of information that can save lives, it bothers me because some of these people that we lose, some of them are my relatives. Now let me speak
I was about to actually to refer to you as somebody from that region, going by this name Kitutu.
So when I'm speaking about this, I'm speaking from the heart. Just because of the work dynamics, I cannot go into very personal, conversations. But I lose people. Those that I see, I know. I speak to these people. I travel in these areas across the country. Just one thing that I would like to emphasize here is that we have a lot of information, we have systems. The question is bridging that gap. This information reaching the communities, like early warning information, reaching the communities, action being taken, that early action being taken. That is where the gap is. And again, just learning from Kasese, I'm talking about, on one hand, the sensors. I'm talking about the systems, the early warning systems. But I'm also talking about community action. So, like at a household level, and that's where I need to clarify. The issue of the community, where is the place of community? Where is the place of these different levels, of authority in action? So, for me, I would like from our end to emphasize that action is a consolidated action from the different levels, right from the individual level, as I mentioned earlier. For you, it should be a challenge to you. When you are crossing Chambogo, those of you who use Ginger Road, do you sit on a border and you tell him, Itawano? Then the water sweeps you. Who is responsible when you are taking that decision? Who? I'll not mention. Is it you? Don't you have the knowledge? Don't you know? Haven't you seen? You know? So when we lose you, the question is that who is responsible for this loss? If you are living next to a crack, and just again to give you information, a lot of research has been done. This crack that we are talking about is a 40-kilometer crack. It passes through 7 districts in this Elgon sub-region.
What?
Yes, and we have all these maps, all this information, and a lot of research work has been done. There's a lot of information by the around us, but we don't touch it.
What's causing that crack?
These are things related to geography. Maybe at another time you invite me here and
Plate
environment.
tectonics.
All these things.
If I remember my geography very
You
well.
still remember your geography?
You know our continent is dividing. Are you aware that it's dividing in very many hundreds of years? We might have 2 continents. So it's related to a lot of geography, climate change, and many dynamics. But that's a discussion for another day. My point here is that the risk that we live with, the action that is supposed to be taken. It is important for us to appreciate that these actions that are required to be taken, they start from the individual level, the household level, even this thing of Kitezi. When Kitezi humbled all of us, we first forgot all our, belongings in terms of affiliation. And we say this is something that has affected all of us. You would pass Kampala here and you find, a lot of garbage, and it is a nuisance to you, really. You are coming to work or near your shop, irrespective of wherever you come from. So it became a community problem. And people said, okay, what do? Do we sort rubbish at a household level? You see, it became so personal that now it was affecting everyone. So my point is, for us, we emphasize, and even in these nice documents that we talk about, I was showing my sister here on my side, that there is even budget, budget figures. Who is to take work? I want to say this. Who does what, when? Who does what, when? How much is entailed? Where? All this matrix is there. For me, I'm again emphasizing, I'm a very serious scientist. I speak with information, verifiable information. So who is supposed to take action at individual level, at household level, at community level, the different structures, at government level, local authorities, and even up to the national level, cascaded, So it is not entirely that one person or one group. It is our collective responsibility to take action against climate change. I personally ride the bicycle once a week. I ride here. I stay in Namugongo, for your information, next to the Catholic shrine. I juggle through traffic. If you ever see someone with a fat tire bicycle, that's me. I go up to Rubaga and go back. That is 38 kilometers once every week. The question is, you who buys a fuel guzzler, are you minding about the environment?
And those ones who steal the money from the train budget.
It comes to at a personal level. What I'm trying to trigger,
those are your views.
In your mind is there is a personal responsibility. We cannot rule out this. True. We can hide behind who is responsible, but let us first look candidly at where the action begins. It begins with you. It begins with me. So that is what I would like to mention. The success stories in Kasese, and not only Kasese, by the many other areas. There are success stories. This, I encourage you, the media, to amplify them. Maybe there are learnings that can be, spread to other areas. What are these learnings? They are around engaging the community being at the center of the action. But I would also like to, and I know this might sound a bit, I would like to again say, you cannot work alone. Red Cross, people always say Red Cross has done great work, but again, Red Cross works auxiliary to the government.
This is
irrespective.
this
the
is the
government
third
has-
time you're stating.
Yeah, I'm emphasizing
He
it,
has,
and I
he
have
has to
here-
calm that. We understand.
I have information.
But unfortunately,
You-
government is
you-
responsible,
you-
and they're not doing you guys a
you
favor.
see,
And I'm
I
talking
have
as the
here-
lead politician
I,
here.
I have here information, and I speak with a lot
5-year
of reference.
strategic plan,
Yes.
2021,
Yeah,
2025.
it has all the information
How much of
regarding
that?
to how we
How
work.
much of that information has been acted on?
And again, that's why I'm saying that we need to speak with
Facts.
with the facts. There are photos. So follow our social. Go to our website. Follow all these, response actions, reports, and databases, systems. These things we are speaking with verifiable information. So for me, as I say, I want to emphasize we work through a coordinated framework. I talked about the DRR platform. You have UN bodies. You have humanitarian actors, irrespective of which groups, community-based groups. We have a collection of people. We work together. Red Cross always works as a community-based organization to help the community. That should not be forgotten. And this is where now we have the winning point. That is our guest. We are in the community. We listen to the community. We do a lot of community engagement and accountability, by the way. Where we have done, like where there are gaps in terms of our actions, we learn from those gaps. We accept them and we improve because we are members of the
You
community.
should train this
There's a-
government.
there's a-
You should train this government.
There's a comment
Can I
coming.
just say something before he
Very
come in? I want to clarify the responsibility always lies with the government,
Yeah.
the government of Uganda. Other actors can come in, they can support, they can play their roles, and we really like to compliment as non-state actors, but the responsibility must lie with government because we pay taxes to this government.
The
We have
social
a
contract.
social contract. Exactly.
Absolutely.
We have a social contract with the state. You give up some of your freedoms, you pay some taxes with the idea that it takes away the burden that comes with sort of managing the entity that is Uganda and actually plans and makes sure everyone is there. So there must be social protection, no interruption on healthcare, no interruption on education, relocation in time. I think this must be underscored because as he is speaking, you may get the sense that because Red Cross is there, things are there. But all the things you're saying, it's wonderful that Red Cross is there and you're working with other actors, and I'm sure you work with government. But government must really take up its role and not sort of step back.
It's the lead
Right.
agency,
We
and
have comments.
they are the ones who are accountable to us.
We have some comments coming in from the listeners, and I'll begin with Samuel, who is listening in from Tinder. Says, I wish Red Cross would take over the budget of disaster preparedness because
You
I doubt if this money reaches on the ground. We have thieves who need to be charged with attempted murder. We have a comment coming in from Henry Kiwenda, who writes and says, good evening, Kenneth. Well done for the program. Now know this from me. When you hear someone talking about climate change but not talking about community involvement, sustainability is zero. Without talking about NDC, nationally determined contribution, then you know that someone is just making a subject. A country must determine what to do and opportunity cost to forego. Then we have another comment. Disaster management in Uganda. I strongly agree with the Honorable Semuju Ibrahim about his identification of the biggest disaster that befell Uganda and made the government so insensitive and unable to effectively respond to any disaster. Secondly, the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness and Management is a bigger disaster in itself. We have another comment from Amo Martin listening in from Bali. What will happen to Ugandans in case the current merciful rains decide to come down for only 2 days non-stop? We need to have a pre-built disaster shelters in all prone areas rather than being reactionary every time a disaster occurs. Now, as long as people continue tilling the slopes of mountains and hills, expect floods, mudslides, because soil and rocks loosen and become easily movable. Kasokoso area is a time bomb. Politicians are simply reactionary. We know our problems. Who is uncharged? That's a question that comes in from AF, one of those people that is listening to this program. I'll give Joel an opportunity to actually update us because he told us there are people in the field who are going to send in some information. Let's see if he has any information, but also to make his closing remarks on this particular topic because we have to let him go. We are going into uncharted waters, and I don't think he would want to comment on some of those issues that are coming in the next segment of our discussion. Joel.
Okay, thank you very much. And on a lighter note, thank you for that protection. You know, I'm a humanitarian actor and I need to tread carefully when I'm seated in a myriad of So this is the update that I've just received from our teams on ground. The total number of affected is still lingering around 1,540. Households totally destroyed. 125.
125 households totally destroyed.
Yes, total number of people displaced, 861.
861.
Yes. And number of people missing, 106.
106.
Yes. I want, again, as I said, and this is something that we need to be careful with, the way this data is segregated, and also how the numbers change. For example, if a body is recovered, so there is a minus somewhere.
Yeah.
So I just
from
urge people
113
to
to 106.
cautious when they are approaching these figures, but also seek clarification from the relevant authorities in regards to the figures. And then number of injured, 21 bodies retrieved. They said about 20. They are still checking, the issue of bodies, checking and double checking. And then number of people who have succumbed to the injuries at the health center, we are told that it is one person. So these are the figures as they are right now from our field teams. But again, I would like to emphasize, we might have varied opinions here on different things and our, thinking and, perspectives about the government and many other, the authorities, MDS, the responsibly charged, authorities. But again, just to emphasize, for us, we work with the government, auxiliary to the government. My parting shot here is that I want you to follow us on social media, Twitter, X, now it's called X. There is no single action that we have done that has not been updated there. Just take your time. Listeners, go there. See Kayunga, Kisoro, both anticipatory action and the response action. Every single response action, every now and then, year come, year go. It is updated there. On our website, go and read elaborately about the action that we do. I would like to just emphasize, we do not say that we work auxiliary to government just in words. The prepositioning of non-food items. The government gives out food. Like now as we speak, there are trucks that either have reached or are on their way to Bulambuli. They are taking their food relief. For us, we don't deal in the food, at least for now. We deal in non-food items. We are setting up shelter tents. You have seen them in Kisoro, Kasese, and so many other areas. So for us, we work in that coordinated framework. The support, you will see tents that have Government of Uganda. You have seen kits. Lord Mayor Lukwago, just here during the fire, incident in Kamocha. In Kamocha.
You were there with
the
Lord
just
Mayor.
Go to the social, you will see. Lukwago, I'm not here to speak politics. You know where he belongs. Didn't you see him give a kit? You go and check the labels on that kit.
He did.
Do you have Government of Uganda there? I don't know. This is your homework. Go and check. So my point here is that as much as we have, these structures and, things in society, politics and so on, for us, we remain clear on saving lives. If it is Kitezi, whether it is the response action that is coordinated by whoever, as long as it is geared towards saving lives, we remain on focus. That is something that I want to emphasize.
Right.
I have a question for Joe before he runs off. For the vulnerable groups, the older persons. It's just unthinkable if you're an old person in this situation or a person with disability or for the children. What are the special measures you're taking to make sure that you're really prioritizing their needs?
Yeah, so our response action is well informed. And again, as I said, we have an approach which is community-based. We call it CEA, Community Engagement and Accountability. We have aspects of Safe Access Framework. We have PGI, Protection, Gender and Inclusion, and we work very closely with Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. And so our response action is well packaged. There are areas, for example, I was talking to my colleague during the break and he was saying, can I have information of Bukedi? So I gave him a map of Butaleja. I have here a map of Mbale, just to contrast the two. In Mbale, in Akaloke, somewhere there, and also just outside the town a bit. There was a flood. Same exact time, a few years ago, there was also a flood in Butaleja, which is a neighboring district. So that is Bukedi sub-region. This is Elgon sub-region. The waters that come from River Manafa from Bududa, they pour into Bukedi. They pour into Butaleja. So we were doing response action, coordinated response, because 2 districts are affected. And people in Butaleja say, don't bring here cash. This one will break our homes. Then people in Valley said, you give us cash, we shall manage. If you do financial literacy, you educate us. Even some men will say, okay, send it to mama's phone. So there are, these dynamics, and we need to appreciate that context-specific, different contexts, different socio-cultural dynamics influence our response package. There are areas where we have given out non-food items at household level. There are areas where we have given out cash and voucher assistance. There are areas where we have given cash controlled towards doing early action, where it's clearing drainage, and then we pay the community members as just appreciation for them to clear their drainage. Then we tell them, next time, please, you can do this yourself,
All right.
can't you?
All right. Really, we thank you, Joel. Thank you very much for being here to provide us all this detailed information that so many Ugandans didn't have. Just, dear listeners, for you to understand what Joel has. Joel has a lot of information, including, disaster preparedness, plans, strategic plans of different districts. The question then is, how do we actually move this information from the books into reality, into action?
The question is, why is it not being moved? Why is it not being moved? These books are being done in cahoot with central and local government, Joel said. Why is it not being moved? It's criminal negligence. This country is mourning.
Let's face it. One of the problems we have had as far as disaster preparedness is concerned is the issue of funding. Funding. We seem not to have adequate resources to respond to every situation.
We don't have adequate resources, but
how do we deal with it?
We don't have adequate resources, and we give it to. We give it to Rocco.
There is something that
we give it to some woman. It's about prioritizing, and we give it to some woman in Atiak over sugar.
All right, let's allow Joel to make that comment.
I'm just planning to make one single comment, clarification. I talked about these plans. You see here, I have a district, I call it multi-hazard district contingency plan. At sub-county level, there is information at sub-county level which is speaking to this. There is information at village level. These are called community action plans. We draw down on the ground. We put seeds, we put stones. These photos, just call us. Just go to our website. You will see. You will see us do this at community level. By the time you see a district contingency plan, put together at a district level, we have moved in the communities. And this area, the community draw their maps. We improve them. These maps that you see here, these are maps drawn at community level. They
because
are
they
action
understand
plans.
the area.
Can I ask, are those plans funded? Because at times that's where the problem is.
Exactly.
When you look at the budgets of the districts.
And the question is on sustainability. And so we do say here that what is the model? What is your approach? And that's where we fail as humanitarian actors. Many humanitarian actors fail. They come, open shop, close tomorrow. They try to mimic what we are doing. They say, Red Cross has volunteers, so let us also hire some people and send them to the field. Then after 3 months, you can't sustain paying them. So the question is, how do we
talking
work
about
within
government. In these plans, there is budget lines. I can go to some pages, and they set them out very clearly. In fact, you were showing me earlier, we're having this debate. So the question is, why aren't we funding them adequately? And I think for me, it's an issue of prioritization. Tax incentives, we give tax incentives to all kinds of
you want Red Cross
unjustified
Red Cross to take over the budget?
I'm saying.
No, it's not about Red Cross. And we don't want the answer from Red Cross, by the way. Just make life easy for Joel. But your listeners must get it.
All right,
just yesterday, if you are following, we were in Parliament. We are pushing for the revision of the Red Cross Act. We are pushing for the DRM bill. We are talking about identified, priority areas to fund. the vote is limited. Red Cross today is advocating that let us have more funding allocated to the respective areas.
How
where
much
we
was
see
your
the gap.
request?
So that's
And
one
so
that we can help.
I have it here, and this is public information. We're in Parliament. This was broadcasted. And so what I would like to let you know that on Tuesday next week, we are launching the humanitarian fund. We are
But
calling
beyond
upon
Red
people
Cross.
sustainably. And we are, as I said, DRM bill is not for Red Cross. That is
Yes.
for the country.
Yes.
That is being pushed. We are
For those-
it's called the DRM bill.
Say it in
Disaster
full.
It is in Parliament, Disaster Risk Management Bill. There is a plan, 2022. There are funding priorities. The budgets have been very detailed, areas
With
of funding.
respect,
But the
Joel,
point is-
the one thing I want to leave with you.
Yeah.
You've done a fantastic job, and you don't do a fantastic job. And with respect, we are neighbors in Bukedi and Bugisu. What you really should be
I
saying to
appreciate
us
Red
that
Cross.
you've done a fantastic job. All the information is there. You work in partnership with the government, but beyond what you provided, which is on the table, it's the responsible government. It's not your docket, and you can't comment.
You have said it better, so we may not hear it from Joel. But Joel, thank you very much for actually finding time to come here and share with us. Now, we need to move on to our next topic, and I'll begin with you, Joseph. The issue of Bank of Uganda. Money disappearing from the national coffers within
When we need
60
money,
seconds
so
when we need
disaster
money, when we are
risk
told there's no
management.
money. What is your reading about this situation?
You're being very unfair to me today. I haven't even settled on this other one here.
You're still
I wish
digesting.
people were absorbing
Let me start. I'm in despair.
All right.
No, because no. Actually,
Utter worry, panic,
as
shock.
I'm going to hand it over to you, the listeners ought to know that we are almost close to tears, and that is formal here
Yeah.
as the panelists. And we don't want to comment on the state of our colleague who's leaving, who's actually limited by the fact of his job. But the three of us panelists here, we're sort of many in tears because it's serious business. Alana, continue.
No, I'm still very shocked about all these billions. And the fact that we got to know way after, like as in, you guys, it's the central bank. It is how we, it's the one responsible for stabilizing
Yeah.
monetary policy, but other things, and money disappears so quickly, and then it's brought up in Parliament slowly. I think we need to learn how to communicate to our people. I think Ugandans want answers. I'm worried about those who don't trust banks. There are many like me, our parents, just what it signals to the economy. So yes, for me, I'm just expressing emotions on this one now. It's no longer.
I can see you a disaster.
So now
Yes.
back to me as a deputy.
You bring the analysis. Me, I'm just shattered. You bring the analysis.
No, we're all shattered on this one. There will be no analysis, except we've said at the beginning of the program that the money that has been stolen, at a time when we need money for disaster management and mitigation, forget about preparedness, is extraordinary. We believe this is theft. We believe it's coordinated. We believe it's part and parcel of the state and the establishment. No wonder, as you yourself have said in the introduction, but we wanted to lock you in, word around town is that the possibility that public servants are linked and associated with this, and we expect and hope that police investigation, but we hope that police investigation will be the investigation of the truth and make sure that and swift, so that confidence is returned to the financial sector. And the learners have actually said it very clearly that, of course, if it's not, the risks, Mr. Finance Minister, we know you're associated with Mabati, but you need to make sure that we speed up this process, because the risks of people fearing to go and begin to bank money because we can no longer trust our banks is huge. It's got huge implication.
All right, let's go for a break now. When we return, we'll carry on with the views of Perry on this issue. But one of the major talking points on this particular matter of Bank of Uganda is the issue of electronic transactions. We are being told to embrace electronic cashless economy, but are the institutions that are handling resources, funds, money, ready actually to guard our interests? Stay tuned to Radio 1 FM 90. We continue after this break. Well, thank you so much for staying with us on Spectrum Extra live on Radio 1 FM 90, reviewing the major events of the week. My name is Kenneth Lukwagandason, your host. I have a panel of three now. We had a fourth panelist, Joel Kitutu from Red Cross, who had to leave us, but I've stayed with Mr. Joseph Ocheno, Miss Perry Aritua, and Miss Alana Kembabazi. Now, Miss Perry, let's hear your thoughts on this issue of Bank of Uganda. Are you equally, shattered?
No, shocked,
all
because
of us
you
were.
would expect that the Bank of Uganda has
Mm.
serious cyber security. That's what you would expect.
Yeah.
Because news of hacking happens
been happening everywhere.
every
Mm.
day
Yeah.
and everywhere. So, and then you see, only 9% of Ugandans have bank accounts. This was a survey which was done by, I think, UBOS, the National Labour Force Survey 2021. Now, if I am listening and I'm not among the 9%,
You're never getting an account.
exactly. So I'm thinking, if they can hack
Some of us
Bank
have to
of
withdraw
Uganda,
money.
what about that small bank that maybe I had intentions of putting my money into? So for me, it's not, let's not look at it just as this one passing phase, but what does it do to build confidence in the ordinary Ugandan to use banks, to deposit money, to, use really the different services that the banks
And
provide.
if you don't mind, actually,
Yeah.
what does it do to Mr. Kaguta's grand plan of what is the other economy again? The money
Economy.
Growing the
Kaguta,
economy tenfold.
money economy. And how do you do it without banks?
So for me, I think as we move forward,
Mm.
I don't know how fast this audit report when it will come out, because to give confidence to every Ugandan,
Yeah.
that report needs to come to its logical conclusion, and it should be publicized for us to know what really happened. Because there are a lot of stories going on. Some saying it's an insider job, others are saying it's a group of hackers. What is the story? So that we're able to gain confidence. Because if you have only 9%, this is a very small percentage of a population of over 45 million having bank accounts. Because then how do you join the money economy? How do you trade internationally when people do not want to transact with banks? So for me, it's worrying. But if that report comes out, then the steps that need to be taken to to prevent such a haste from happening in the future really need to happen. But it's a shame. And you see why I had no words at first. I was like, just a week ago, Post Bank had reportedly had
Yes.
500 million in its the place where they keep money. I don't know the word. That fake money. Then you have Bank of Uganda. Now, for anyone who is listening, every day you read Ugandan stories and you're like, okay, like what is this?
What is
When
next?
will we ever be serious as a country and be taken seriously? Because what this does, investor confidence. You're dealing with other factors. It's not only the population, but who would want to invest in a country like this? Where every day you have fraud, you have issues of corruption. So for me, if we do not get that report out, it's going to further derail the little confidence that a few Ugandans still have. And that's why I really hope Parliament continues to put pressure that this report is presented and that it is publicized and that steps are taken to ensure that those recommendations are enforced. But as people say, this is Uganda.
But for me, I have, before that, it's not even waiting for the audit.
Yes,
Public
Alana.
trust has been eroded. Kenneth, you should be hosting Bank of Uganda. They should be telling us already. The way the country heard about such a serious incident was very wrong. We were like, wait, what? What just happened? Because of some things, coming out through Parliament, people who had heard, they need to be on every single platform, giving us a sense of what they have found, measures they are taking. It is of the utmost importance to restore any sort of hope in the banking sector. The damage control is being done, even as they're getting the full details of it. Because like she said, hacking happens everywhere in the world. I'm yet to did this happen at central bank elsewhere? I am yet to hear. I'm
I
trying
am yet to hear
to
about.
get, like in a big, exactly, right? So I think it's extremely important. In fact, the president, I know he's the one who ordered all that, but I think he really needs to be at the helm of getting just some of the telling us exactly what happened here.
And maybe just to add, what steps are they taking to mitigate? Because you can collaborate. The world has really moved in terms of how they deal with cybersecurity. What are other countries doing? What do we learn? But you can only get those mitigating factors if you know what happened. And that's why that audit report is very important. Publicize it so that you restore confidence in the few Ugandans who have bank accounts, but those who may have wanted to open bank accounts. Because if you don't have a banking sector that works, the economy doesn't work very well.
All right.
In any case, they have the capacity. A state that has got capacity to invade Kenya and steal somebody without the knowledge of Kenyan authorities, because that is official, and bring them in here and take them to Machini. That state has capacity to make sure that our monies are safe. And particularly a state, linked around the money economy, which is the new miracle coming after 40 years, surely it must be able to do so. But my concern, though, quickly, is that, Perry, 9% is not surprising. These fellows came from the bush and found Uganda Commercial Bank, a People's Bank, is now Stanbic and is dead. But your other point is not about the population, really. It does not matter. 9% is too low on a serious note. Actually, Ugandans, let's hope we have this resolved. But after that, we need to build confidence very quickly so that we move the proportion of the population involved in mainstream banking from 9% to possibly 35%. But maybe that will be UPC government to push it about 60% of their part, because it's extremely important. The world is moving on, and it's moving on very, very swiftly.
All right.
Money should be in banks, not in granaries. But at this stage, at this rate, I'm not quite sure.
Or under mattresses.
All right. One other thing we need to discuss now is the issue of gender-based violence. We know the police crime report indicates that last year alone we had 17,000 cases, and points to the challenge that is deep in our communities. We are spending about 78 billion shillings to treat and respond to victims of this particular violence. Now, there's also a situation that is emerging that while we have been familiar with the fact that the violence is only targeting women and girls, it appears that the men are also facing the same problem. Perry.
I don't know about that, because you have to have
Perry,
facts.
you don't.
No, you have to have facts.
Well,
because
there was
the annual crime report of the police 2023 stated that there are 14,846 cases of sexual violence. What the report does not do is disaggregate. And that for me is important, because you can't make assumptions when it comes to gender-based violence, because you need specific actions.
Did they talk about the reports or the aggregated it?
No, what they did, they just presented the annual crime statistics.
So where does the figure of male
it just gives a lump sum figure that there were
that's very confusing. I didn't know that.
46 sexual violence cases and 14,681 cases of domestic violence respectively reported to police. What they need to do a bit further is to disaggregate how many of those reports were made by men, how many were made by women. Now, one of the things that I know, because we work on some of these issues, is that because of the way our society is structured, men at times do not report. That's a fact, because you'll be looked at as weak. Now, the other thing also, which is also a fact, that even when you have this number of cases being reflected in the police report, that's not the total figure. Because the number of people who don't report cases of gender-based violence because of social stigma, because of shame, of reprisal, where you report and people look at you as this person who is not serious. You don't respect marriage. Why would you report your spouse, even when it's a crime? Now, what I must say, and this is where I will commend the police, especially the Family Protection Unit, is that we have seen some progress in terms of how they receive cases of domestic violence and how they deal with it. A lot of this is because there's been investment in training. There has also been some resourcing, which I think needs to be improved. They have also worked a lot with civil society, including the organization I work for, to educate the community on what GBV is, what its effects are, and what communities can do to prevent it. What we have seen as a result of that is that people have a better understanding that this is a crime, because some communities believe that culturally it is okay to beat a woman. That's their belief. The control, the dominance, thinking that this is property. And that's why I said that it's important to have real information when you talk about gender-based violence. Now, it's also important for people to understand that gender-based violence is not only physical. It can be emotional, it can be economic. People who deny their children a right to go to school, and yet they have money to pay school fees. That is economic violence. It's emotional violence, where you then have effects of psychological damage, where a child is at home, but the father or mother could afford, but they just decided no. Our society at times only thinks about gender-based violence in terms of physical violence. It's important to think about these other forms of violence and its effects. What the World Bank has shown is that countries lose a lot of money when they don't deal with this issue, because then you find that the person who is either mentally stressed cannot work, their productivity is low, so they cannot produce in terms of going to work. Revenue suffers for government, because if you're not working, you're not paying tax, for instance, like pay as you want. So there are all those effects, and it's important that society understands that, because when you understand that, then you see it as a problem. But if you just think, oh, this is just someone being slapped, that slap may mean they have to maybe be in hospital, or mentally they cannot function.
But what are the major causes, before we hear from Joseph?
There are a number of causes. One, I talked about the social norms, where some people believe that it's actually okay for a woman to be beaten, or for a girl to be beaten. It's rare where they believe a man should be beaten, because the way our society is structured, it's very patriarchal. But then there are issues of alcohol abuse, where people just, when you drink too much, then you will not have money to provide fees. You may not have money to provide for your family, and I said that's economic violence. But you also have the mental stress. During COVID, actually, that's when we saw people started recognizing that mental health is actually a serious problem in this country. Where someone keeps quiet, they don't talk, people commit suicide because they have been affected by either emotional violence or physical violence or economic violence. So there are different causes for different interest groups. At times it reflects differently. For instance, for children, you find the adults who believe that the only way to discipline a child is to beat the child. But for some children, that is the beginning of the end. And that's why people must be taught what are the other ways of disciplining children. How do you communicate? Because there are even just people who don't know how to communicate as spouses. They think it's about shouting, that, you're dominant, then someone has to respect you regardless of how you behave. So we need to be able to deal with this problem right from the family. And for GBV, all actors must play their part. Laws must be available. They must be enforced. You must have households where partners look at each other as partners, not as one dominant factor and then the other one is a servant, because that creates problems. You also then lastly have to have a government that enforces these laws, that if someone is beaten, you don't say this is a private problem. You have to educate cultural leaders that some of these things are not just home issues. People must be held accountable for their actions.
Wait, I saw a statement that your organization issued, and rather than speak to this particular aspect that you're bringing forward, you took the line of political aspect, violence.
Yes.
Is there violence happening against women in political parties? That's what your statements seem to suggest.
Yes, a lot of it. In fact, if you look at our report following the 2021 election,
in politics, really,
it showed the different types of violence, the sexual violence that happens against candidates, against especially female candidates. The lack of policies where people get away with things because internally, even within the political party, there are no mechanisms to deal with it. Thankfully, there are few political parties that have adopted policies against sexual harassment. My prayer is that they enforce those policies.
For instance?
UPC has adopted one, NUP has adopted one, FDC recently adopted its policy against sexual harassment, DP has a policy against sexual harassment. So increasingly, for me, it is action, ensuring that there are mechanisms for enforcing those policies, that these committees are trained, the ones who are supposed to listen to these complaints, that they are trained to enforce these policies. Women also face the physical violence, that happens during elections. Then there's the economic violence, which I spoke about, where you want to maybe get resources within the family to be able to get nomination fees.
All right.
And someone is saying, no, you can't have.
When you mentioned UPC and you didn't mention NRM, you gave Joseph ammunition, and he was eager to jump in. Joseph.
What ammunition? No, NRA, every time I'm in pain to mention the name, so really it's a relief anyway. But look, extraordinarily, on this power thing, UPC provided the first woman leader as early as 1991 in the name of Cecile Ogwal, the first leader of an independent political party across the continent.
That is not very early. UPC had been
90
around for quite some time.
You can call
you can't say
so
early.
which other had provided around the
From the
world?
60s.
Yeah, but which
First cabinet of Dr. Milton Obote was dominated fully by men.
You're really playing down this very important
No, I'm
point.
telling you the truth. The first time we saw a woman flying high in a cabinet was when Idi Amin appointed Princess Elizabeth Bagaya as a foreign minister. Not so?
Yes, I am just telling you, in 1991, UPC had the first leader of a major independent political party anywhere in Africa. And in 2005, UPC had not only the mother of this country, in Mama Mira, the president and the presidential candidate for the first independent political party on the continent. I was a party to the proposals for mainstreaming youth and women in UPC, and many of this is part of policy and programs. But look, in context, very unfortunately, we don't have the time. This is a matter close to my heart because I'm a progressive, a feminist, and I was actually going to talk about this thing in the context of violence. I look back I was way back in the 70s as a little primary school kid, and then I remember that one of the reasons I think possibly pushed so much, including the kind of woman I would rather is my wife, was when I saw this man riding a bicycle in Agongera and whipping the woman in front. And very likely what had happened was that the woman would have run back to their home, the kind of things that parents talk about, and maybe the guy goes, I've already brought cows down there, and the family unleashes her, go back to your man, and this guy is busy weeping. That is still photographic in me, and I'll never forget. So, no, this thing is something that we need to deal with and deal with urgent. But number two, I want to ask that Perry gives credit to the police. I give credit to the police for the progress. But it's extremely urgent that the police take the matter of domestic violence reported urgently. I have received merely as a general, who's not associated with anything to do with the law enforcement, cases where people come to me and to intervene. And many upper middle class Ugandan women at Kampala are facing many of these things. And in many cases, people fear to report because the police are going to dismiss them. But number two, there is something important, that some women report this violence, and there are men who are associated with some other people in politics, in power, in government, in the police, go ahead and subdue this. Finally, because there's no time, there is a political elite in Kampala, men, my fellow men, who, because they've parted away with women, including sometimes women who would have left them because they were cheating on them, big men, they choose that either next time I come home to the house, maybe I'm renting for you, that's their own business, I hug you. If you refuse a hug, no school fees, that part of that parents say, and no rental payment. Primarily, I know a number of cases today, and I really need to use this platform. I know a number of cases of eminent people, who have blackmailed women and therefore related children, putting young children in huge amount of trauma, school fees, housing, accommodation, basic needs, and you go on and on. This must stop. Ken, I think you should invite particularly the three of us back to a specialist edition of this program so that maybe we give it some justice by giving it 1 hour.
All right, let's hear from Alana.
Well, I'm glad we're having this discussion during the 16 days of activism. I think it's heartbreaking. When I was young, violence against women was so normalized. Part of why I think I was radicalized at an early age was...
So you are radical?
But trying to understand what made it okay for a society to determine that certain people will be at the bottom always and are deserving of violence. And we have young girls. I met 3 beautiful young girls today. One told me she wants to be a doctor, 2 said they wanted to be a lawyer. They were there selling mangoes on the street and convincing me that they go to school. I'm still trying to figure out how. But I think we must determine as a society that we're going to do better for our young people. They must not step into this soiled legacy. And I think government must do everything, double down on efforts. Yes, there is stuff it's doing, great stuff, but it really must double down on efforts to make sure it's actually implementing the great policies it has, the court sessions that it has dealing with this, restoring trust in public institutions. If I go to police and report, am I safe? Will justice go to the highest bidder? So all those things are important to tackle, because we must begin to reimagine Uganda. Our topics this evening were quite depressing, and I think that for those young girls who are about 9 or 10, I'm really hoping they're not sitting at some point talking about such horrific things, and it's something where we must engage everyone, the cultural leaders and so forth. I want to underscore something Perry said. There are also socio-economic factors that escalate this, and we saw this during COVID when people lost jobs. It went up, and so I think it's really, I will keep always preaching, you must pay attention to the socio-economic rights. There is a rollover, a very negative detrimental effect on society when you do not, and that's why kids are sometimes then caught up, like you're saying, someone's education is caught up because the guy feels he has to assert masculinity. Some of those things should not be left to the whims of people. They are rights. So I think it's extremely important. I hope to see more sessions against this. I think that there are other ways in which we can really explore violence against women, but today we're talking about domestic violence, but there's ways in which there's real violence against women happening in health facilities.
For instance?
With patient detention of women who come to give birth, and then you detain someone who just gave birth to a newborn baby. So I think there's a lot more to explore on violence against women.
Just 30 seconds.
Very
One
quickly.
thing. Answer. Education. We provided for it before, including specialist girls' education. Going forward, minus the party politicking of it, you educate girls, you give them capacity, you build them, and they take positions. I know there's middle-class violence these days, including women who may be up there, but there you'll have mitigated, because the vast majority are predominantly rural or women who are actually economically on the lower end, and in many cases sometimes on also educational and literary lower end of the spectrum.
Perry.
I think the last thing, hold people accountable. Let people not look at this as something flimsy, because that's the only way you start changing society. If I know that I do something and there will be repercussions. Thank you.
Right. Looking forward next week, Mr. Cheno, you hope, your projection, some of these things that we have discussed are, are likely to, continue manifesting. We have this disaster situation in Bulambuli where the Prime Minister has gone. What are your expectations?
The river Pakwach is sunk. Remember that Karuma is blocked. I know that there are developments, including on Monday we may be getting news stories. I understand there are a number of national politicians, I'm glad, who are actually actively involved and seeking to hold the authorities to account. But that is that. But the implications are huge in terms of economic realities of our country, which is already a struggling economy. But beyond that's actually quite clearly across the country. How are we able to have this conversation nationally without politicizing? Not that we don't politicize it, but without making it petty political, and without people, taking some of those extremes is the problem. But whatever it is, I think Ugandans really need to wake up and begin to take responsibility. But part of taking responsibility must be making sure that we hold the authorities to account, because every penny is your shilling, lest you forget.
With that, we come to the end of Spectrum Extra. Thank you very much, dear panelists, and thank you very much, dear listeners, for contributing to this discussion. Well, I've been your host, Kenneth Lukwago Anderson. On behalf of the team, we wish you a good weekend.